Hello class, good day. This is ARH 304, History of Architecture 4. So this online course is brought to you by Iloilo Science and Technology University Virtual Learning Environment. So as for this subject, I am your instructor, Architect Jared Bicarnahe. This subject is for BS Architecture program and welcome to our subject. Ang aton nga unang lesson which revolves in the influence of Philippine architecture and the different era of Philippine architecture. Pre-recorded na nga ito yung mga lectures, by the way, para in case nga may gusto kong review, so pwede nyo lantaw liwat sa YouTube. So the Philippine architecture and its influences. So it reflects the historical and cultural traditions in the country. So, most prominent history structures in the archipelago are influences by Austronesian, Chinese, Spanish, and American architectures. Kalabanan nga makita nyo nga mga structure dito sa Philippines, may influence gid sa Spanish, American, so kalabanan sa mga government buildings is influenced by American architecture. So sa mga simbahan naman niya, Spanish architecture. And maskin sa mga newly built structure. So during 330 years of Spanish colonialization, so the Philippine architecture was dominated by Spanish influences. So the Augustinian friars, along with the religious orders, built many grand churches and cathedrals all over the Philippine island. So muna kalabanan sa mga church nga daan, Spanish na ang nag-construct sa una. Siyempre with the help of Filipino builders. During this period, the traditional Filipino bahay na bato style for the large houses emerge. Palabanan sa mga manggaranon sa una, ang ginagamit nila nga design for their houses is bahay na bato style. So ang sa dalom yan na bato na siya, and ang sa babaw is wood. This is an example of bahay na bato. So as you can see, ang sa dalom niya is built with stones. And then ang sa babaw is made of wood. And then ang mga bintana it is made of kapis shells with the wood frame. Tapos ang iyang atop is clay tiles na siya. So this is bahay ng bato. Now these were large houses built of stone and wood, combining Filipino, Spanish, and Chinese style elements. So hindi siya gyapon original nga Filipino design. So may influensya gyapon sang Spanish and Chinese style element. By this time, wala gyapon sa original nga design ang Filipinos. So let's proceed. After the Philippines was ceded to the United States as a consequence of the Philippine-American War in 1898, the architecture of the Philippines was dominated by American aesthetics. So diri na din nagsulod ang mga buildings sa aton nga mga old eskwelahan. So ang mga eskwelahan kalabanan was designed by the Americans. So in this period, the plan of the modern city of Manila was designed with neoclassical architecture and Art Deco buildings by famous American and Filipino architects. So by this time, may ara nakita sa American period, may ara nakita na sa mga Filipino architects. So during World War II, large portions of Intramuros and Manila were destroyed, and many heritage districts in the provinces were burned down by the Japanese before the end of the war. So in the reconstruction period after the Second World War, many of the destroyed buildings were rebuilt. However, a majority of heritage structure, especially in the provinces, were lost and never built. Gamay lang ang mga churches and mga buildings na nag-survive during the Japanese War. So most of the structure that were lost are considered a focal properties of former heritage towns. And then, in the late 20th century, so modern architecture nagsulod na siya sa Philippines with straight lines and functional aspects was introduced, particularly in the Brutalist architecture. So, sa subong, wala po mga magyapon na makita, bisan din sa Lilo. So, Brutalist architecture, ang ano na siya, ang kita na kamo sa mga buildings nga wala gin pintahan. So, ang Brutalist nga word comes from the French phrases beton, brute. So, ano siya? Type ko siya. Beton. Brute. So, this word means raw concrete. So, makita nyo na diri sa mga buildings, pisan diri sa Lilo, ang mga buildings na ang wala pinta bala. So, that is Brutalist architecture. This kind of architecture is characterized by minimalist construction that showcase the bare building materials and structural elements over decorative design. So, bisan si Swiss French architect Le Corbusier, so he also used this kind of designs. So, kalabanan ng mga government built structure during the Marcos period, ang kalabanan ng design nga gingamit is Brutalist, like the ICC, the PICC, CCP, or the Cultural Center of the Philippines. So, Brutalist architecture na siya. Kay makita nyo ang raw concrete nga facade. There have been proposals to establish a policy where each municipality and city will have the ordinance mandating all construction and reconstructions within such territory to incline with the municipality or city architecture and landscaping styles to preserve and conserve the country's dying heritage sites, which have been demolished one at a time at fast pace due to urbanization, cultural irresponsible development, and lack of townscape architectural vision. So, sa mga post na kung kaysa makita nyo na mga bricks nga churches, nakibot ka lang, mapintahan, isang color pink, isa color green. So, that is irresponsible to the cultural aspect of the heritage site. So, kanugon dapat gina-preserve na siya. Kay hindi lang aesthetics, hindi lang nami siya lang tawon. It is also because nakatatak na da sa building na kung ano ang iyang nga history, kung ano ang iya inagyan. That is the responsible of architects. Hindi lang design, hindi lang aesthetics. We have also responsibility to the history sang building nga aton nga gina-design. So such policies are used by countries that have preserved their architectural marvels and entire cities as a whole for hundreds of years, such as Italy, France, Romania, Germany, and Spain. So sa pagkabalo ko, ang daw grabe lang maghalong sa ilang heritage sites is ang vegan. So diriya sa aton niya, kung gusto ang mga old buildings gina-demolish na lang, na isan sa mga buildings nga bag-o paglapastangan na siya sa historical value sang building nga ina. So hindi na siya dapat amo na nga sa aton nga mga municipalities. So mayara kita da nga Office of the Building Official. So before kita mag-demolish sang isa ka building, ginapangayuan na siya sang demolition permit. As building official, it's either nga ang building official engineer na siya or architect. So as engineer or architect, so dapat gina-analyze niladanay ang building nga inog demolish if may heritage value in ang building or it is preserved by the government agencies like National Historical Commission and National Commission for Culture and Arts or NCCA and National Historical Commission of the Philippines, and then the Philippine Registry of Cultural Property or PRECOP. So amo na ang mga agencies sa Philippines ang naga-protect sa aton nga mga heritage buildings. The proposal advocates for the usage and reinterpretations of indigenous, colonial, and modern architecture and landscaping styles that are prevalent or used to be prevalent in a given city or municipality. So the proposal aims to foster a renaissance in the Philippines landscaping and townscaping, especially in rural areas, which can easily be transformed into new architectural heritage town within a 50-year time frame. So unfortunately, many Philippine-based architecture and engineering experts lack the sense of preserving the heritage townscape, such as the case in Manila. So tsakto ni siya. Kung may heritage nga gina-preserve sa isa ka town nga na. So kung guys ang mga irresponsible nga mga hindi man tanan pero kalabanan, mga professionals, so wala nila gina take into consideration ang heritage values ang lugar. Or sabi vegan, example labi vegan, kalabanan dira mga daan ng mga building, tapos gulpi ka lang imo yan nagpatindog sa skyscraper sa tunga. Hindi siya nami eyesore siya. We architects dapat we conducted studies about the history sang lugar nga na and the cultural heritage before ka mag-design sang building mo. So dapat ga-connect na siya. Or may ara siya nga elements nga naga-fuse sa existing design sang lugar nga. So para hindi siya eyesore, naga-adapt siya visually and historically. So sa Manila amo nang kakatabo. And then let's proceed sa modern architecture. So the modern architecture of the Philippines following World War II has been strongly influenced by the modern architecture of the United States. The quest for Filipino style has been considered since 1950s in the response to the strong American influence on architecture and other cultural fields such as literature and painting. So ang gitpa-assignment ko sa inyo sang ligad, so ginpamangkot ko dito if may ara gid man bala nga architecture nga kinaiya ang Philippines or it is only influenced by other countries. So sa tuod lang, sang una, syempre we are influenced sang Spain, we are influenced by Americans, we are influenced by Chinese. Nagkaroon lang sang personal Filipino style ang Philippines during the 60s and 70s. A number of important building structure were erected by the government to express the Filipino style. So this include the Cultural Center of the Philippines or CCP and the Philippine International Convention Center or the PICC. So the two of these buildings were both designed by architect Leandro Vilocsin and Tahanang Filipino by Francisco T. Manyosa or Bobby Manyosa. So both of these architects have been leaders in terms of Filipino style and at the same time have been influential in the architectural society. So regarding the domestic touch in modern architecture before World War II, although a few examples did exist, So the design was confined to details or parts of the whole. So the Philippine Metropolitan Theater, designed by M.1.a in 1931, is a good example of this architecture. So Arellano was a talented architect and painter, designed the theater in a remarkable Art Deco style that was intended to express the Filipino touch. So class, this is the picture of the Manila Metropolitan Theater. This building is designed by M. Arellano in 1931. It has the domestic touch and modern architecture. So this is also Art Deco style and was intended to express Filipino touch. So, amo lang na yung ako ng lecture for the topic, the influences of Philippine architecture. So, let's proceed to the different era of Philippine architecture. Different era in Philippine architecture. So, let's start with the pre-Spanish period. Pre-Spanish period. So sa una, early Filipinos nag-start lang sa mga natural caves, and then ang iba sa mga tree houses, and then during the pre-colonial vernacular architecture, nag-amat-amat ng mga Filipinos create sang ilang mga house design. So nagsulod na ang binuron houses sa mga esneg, mga binayon, sang kalinga, bale. During this period, diri na create ang traditional nga bahay kubo. Because the Philippines is mostly characterized by lowland areas. So nag-usogid ang design sang bahay kubo because it is designed for lowland dwelling. Kay mainit sa Pilipinas, so ang bahay kubo is a good example of Philippine architecture nga na-apply taran nga passive cooling, sun orientation, good selection of building materials. So number two era is the Spanish period. So diri na di masulod ang mga Spaniards kagang ilang mga influence sa Philippine architecture. And then the third era is the American period. Ang ginawa na sa Americans ang Philippines, introduce man sang design ang mga Americans. So dako man ang ilang influence sa Philippine architecture. And then after the American period, sulod ang post-war. Ang post-war, amo na siya ang Japanese colonialization. So damo ng mga buildings ang nagkalaguba during the post-war. So by this time, karoon sila sang massive na reconstruction sa mga buildings na nagkalaguba. So next is Philippine architecture during the 60s and 70s. So during this era, dito na can introduce ang Filipino style of architecture. Kaya during this era, dito na din patindog ang Philippine Cultural Center, ICC. So dito man na din introduce ang Brutalist architecture. So this is the best era in Philippine architecture. After the 60s and 70s, so gamat-amat na adapt ang mga Filipinos and nagsulod na ang contemporary Philippine architecture. is the sixth era in Philippine architecture. That's all for this topic. So sa next naman yung topic, we will be discussing the Philippine architecture. We will be discussing different examples and its characteristics. That's all for this topic. Mahatag ako sa assignment after this. And kindly upload it to VLE after.